If you'd told me at my wedding that the thing to nearly destroy my marriage would cost $3 at a pharmacy and fit in the palm of my hand, I would have laughed. I am not laughing now. Well, mostly not. It started with me standing in my own kitchen at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, holding a bottle of men's lubricant that absolutely, categorically, 100% did not belong to me, while my wife slept peacefully upstairs, apparently unbothered by the small grenade she'd accidentally left in her handbag. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. I'd been looking for the spare car keys. That's it. That's the whole origin story. Not jealousy. Not suspicion. Not a gut feeling or a sudden revelation or a sign from God. Just car keys. Because mine had fallen between the couch cushions, and I had an early meeting with a parent at Eastfield High who I was already dreading. I reached into Kimberly's brown leather bag on the kitchen counter, the one she always left there, and my hand found chapstick, her work ID, a pack of Tic Tacs, the keys I was looking for, and a matte black bottle with minimalist font that said, in the kind of tone that only typography can achieve, that it was absolutely not a woman's product. I stood there for 10 seconds, maybe 15. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the stove ticked. I turned the bottle over in my hand like I was a detective examining evidence, which, as it would turn out, was precisely what I was doing, just without any of the training, the badge, or the faintest idea of what I was actually holding. Don't overreact, Nolan, said the reasonable part of my brain. Name one explanation, said the other part. The part that had apparently been quietly filing things away for 2 years, like a very patient, very paranoid accountant. I couldn't name one, so I put the bottle back exactly where I found it, went to the garage, retrieved the superglue from the third shelf behind the paint thinner, came back inside, and made the swap with the careful precision of a man who had watched too many heist movies and was now deeply regretting not having paid more attention to the part where everything goes wrong. Did I think it through? I thought it through for approximately 4 seconds, and the sum total of my deliberation was, whoever is on the other end of this little situation is about to have a very uncomfortable evening, and I am going to know about it without having to say a single word. Petty? Absolutely. Satisfying? In the moment? Completely. Catastrophically? Federally? Internationally stupid? I had no idea. None whatsoever. I made pasta, went to bed, and slept like a man with a clean conscience, which is the specific kind of sleep that the universe reserves for people who are about to be proven deeply, irreversibly wrong. Let me tell you about Kimberly before I tell you what happened next, because she deserves that, and because none of this makes sense without her. Kimberly McCain was the kind of woman who made you feel like you'd been doing everything in your life at about 60% capacity. Not in a cruel way. In the way that made you want to run the extra mile, read the extra chapter, be the better version of yourself, because she was looking and her standards were quietly, devastatingly high. She was sharp and measured and funny in that particular way where the joke lands 3 seconds after she's already moved on, and you're still standing there laughing while she's reading something on her phone. We met at a professional development conference I had not wanted to attend, over coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime in the previous decade. She made a remark about the keynote speaker that was so precisely, surgically accurate that I laughed louder than I'd intended, and she looked at me with an expression that said she'd been waiting for someone to get it. That was 11 years ago. I'd been falling ever since. She worked at the Harwick District Courthouse as a legal compliance officer. Long hours, complicated cases, documentation she couldn't discuss, a work phone she kept separate from her personal one. I respected it. I was a history teacher. I spent my days explaining the Missouri Compromise to 16-year-olds who would rather be doing literally anything else. Her work sounded important. I never pushed. What I understand now is that she had been counting on exactly that, but there had been things. Small things. The laptop she angled away whenever I walked past. The calls she took in the garage at odd hours, voice low, words clipped. The way she sometimes looked at me across the dinner table with an expression I could never quite read. Something between love and guilt, and a third thing I didn't have language for yet. I had filed all of it under "she's stressed at work" and kept moving. Because that's what you do when you trust someone completely. You choose not to see. I had been choosing not to see for 2 years. The bottle ended that arrangement. Day 1, after the swap, nothing. Kimberly came home at 7, kissed me on the cheek, made tea, asked about my day, ate dinner, watched television with her feet tucked under her on the couch. Normal. Completely infuriatingly normal. Day 2. Also nothing. I started to wonder if I was a paranoid idiot who had wasted a Tuesday evening and a perfectly good tube of superglue on a manufactured crisis. Day 2 was the last day of my old life. I just didn't know it yet. Ralph Lewis caught me in the hallway outside room 114 on day 2 morning, 3 minutes before first bell. Ralph taught biology 2 doors down, had the energy of a man who had consumed an entire pot of coffee and was looking for somewhere to put it, and possessed the social awareness of a golden retriever, which is to say, absolutely none, deployed with tremendous warmth. He stopped, pointed at my face, and said, "Something's wrong with you." "Good morning, Ralph." "No, I'm serious. You've got a look." "I don't have a look." "You absolutely have a look. It's the look where you know something, but you don't know yet if the knowing is good or bad." He tilted his head. "Kimberly okay?" "Kimberly's fine. Go teach something." He pointed at me again, as he backed away down the hallway, still pointing, still watching, like a man filing evidence. I should have listened to Ralph. Ralph, as it turned out, was the only person in my immediate orbit who was exactly who he said he was. There is something both comforting and deeply depressing about that. Day 3, 3rd period, 11:45 in the morning. I was mid-lecture on the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, which is genuinely one of the most gripping moments in modern history if you tell it correctly. And I was telling it correctly, when Principal Donna Hartwell's voice came over the classroom intercom. "Mr. McCain, could you please come to the main office? There are some people here to see you." 26 juniors looked at me with the specific alertness that teenagers reserve for moments that seem like they might involve someone being in serious trouble. "Pages 140 to 155, I said. "There will be a quiz." There was not going to be a quiz, but the threat bought me 30 seconds of silence, and right then I needed the silence. There were 2 of them in Donna Hartwell's office, both in suits that said federal government, as clearly as if the words had been embroidered on the lapels. Both with the kind of stillness that isn't relaxed, it's trained. Donna herself was standing against the far wall next to her potted fern, wearing the expression of a woman who was very seriously reconsidering her career. The taller one showed me a badge. FBI, Special Agent Roland Briggs, Counterintelligence Division. He had the face of a man who had been delivering bad news professionally for so long that his default expression had permanently reconfigured itself into something that communicated, "Whatever you're about to hear, I've heard worse." "Mr. McCain," he said, "please sit down." "I'll stand." "Please sit down," he said again, exact same tone. Not a suggestion. I sat down. "Are you familiar?" Briggs said, opening a folder with federal evidence protocol regarding the handling of monitored personal items during an active counterintelligence operation. I looked at him. "I teach high school history." "Yes, we're aware of what you teach, Mr. McCain." He didn't look up from the folder. "Are you familiar with the protocol?" "No." He explained it slowly, clearly, and without any dramatic flair, which somehow made it significantly worse. A counterfeiting syndicate. 18 months of federal surveillance. Defense intelligence being moved across state lines inside commercial lubricant bottles. Microfilm. A tracker. A microdot capsule. The handoff. Sadie Cross, the courier, collecting the bottle, noticing the tamper, vanishing within the hour. The primary target going dark. 2 years of operational groundwork gone. He closed the folder. "You did that," he said. The room was very quiet. Donna Hartwell appeared to be studying a point on the wall approximately 6 inches above my head, with extraordinary focus. "I want to ask about my wife," I said. Briggs and his associate exchanged a look. "The kind of look that has a full conversation living inside it, Mr. McCain." "Don't." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Don't say my name like that. Don't give me the pause. Just tell me." "Your wife," Briggs said carefully, "has been an employee of the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 9 years. The fern in the corner of Donna Hartwell's office had 1 brown leaf at the bottom. I stared at it for a moment. "She's not a compliance officer," I said. "No." "She never was." "No." 9 years. We had been married for 6. "Is she safe?" I asked. Briggs looked at me for a moment, and something shifted in his expression, not warmth exactly. Recognition. The kind a man gets when he realizes the person in front of him isn't going to fall apart. For now, he said, she's been pulled from the field. She's at the Harwick Federal Building. I nodded once. I looked at Donna Hartwell, who appeared to be praying silently, and I said, cancel my afternoon classes. I didn't know it yet, but I had just asked to be driven toward the first in a series of revelations that would dismantle every assumption I had ever made about my own life. The second revelation was waiting for me at the Federal Building. The third was buried in a file that an analyst named Priya Anand hadn't found yet. And the fourth, the one that would put me in a rain-soaked parking garage in Clarksville staring at a dead man. That one was still 3 weeks away. They drove me to the Harwick Federal Building in an unmarked car that smelled like stale coffee and institutional ambition. I sat in the back and watched Harwick go by through the window, the diner on Clemens Street where Kimberly and I ate breakfast every Sunday, the park where we walked when the weather was good, the courthouse where she had never actually worked, and I did the thing I always did in moments of crisis, which was to try to find the historical parallel. I couldn't find one. History, for all its usefulness, does not have a chapter on what to do when you discover that your wife of 6 years is a federal operative who has been living a double life with the calm efficiency of a woman who has simply never found it necessary to tell you. The Federal Building had the energy of a place where important things happened in deliberately unimportant-looking rooms. Briggs walked me through a hallway that smelled like recycled air and stopped outside a door with a small reinforced window. Kimberly was sitting at a table on the other side. Same gray blazer she'd worn to work that morning, hands flat on the table in front of her. Not cuffed. She wasn't a suspect, but there was something different about her posture. The performance was gone. All of it. The careful, curated ease she wore every day like a second skin had been taken off. And what was underneath was someone I both recognized completely and didn't know at all. She looked up and saw me through the window. I don't have the right words for what moved across her face in that moment. I've spent 12 years finding language for human experience, and I still don't have it. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't relief. It was something that looked like a person setting down something extraordinarily heavy after carrying it for a very, very long time. Briggs opened the door. I walked in and sat across from her. The door closed. Silence. Then Kimberly said, "I'm sorry." "How long?" I asked. "Since before we met. Were we—" I stopped. Started again. "Was any of it?" "All of it," she said immediately, firmly, like she'd rehearsed it and it still hadn't gotten any easier to say. "Nolan. All of it was real. Everything that was us was real. I need you to hear that before anything else. You lied to me every single day for 6 years. About work. Not about us." I laughed. It came out wrong. Too sharp, too short. "That is a distinction you are going to have to walk me through very slowly, Kim, because from where I'm sitting those two things are not as separate as you seem to think they are." "I know." Her voice broke on the second word and she pulled it back together with the kind of precision that told me she'd been pulling herself together under pressure for a long time. "I know what I took from you. I'm not going to tell you it was okay because it wasn't. But I need you to know that I chose you. Every single day, through every operation, every cover story, every closed door, I chose you. And there were days when choosing you cost me more than you'll ever understand." That last sentence, I filed it away without knowing why. It would matter later. It would matter enormously. "Tell me about the bottle," I said. She walked me through it. The syndicate. The microfilm operation, the controlled handoff she'd been running for months. The bottle as evidence container. Tracked, embedded, carefully placed. The night of the exchange, it was supposed to be the one-time glue. The syndicate's top handler, a ghost with no name and no record who had been operating invisibly for over a decade, was supposed to surface in person. One moment, one identification. The whole operation hung on it. And then her history teacher husband had come along with a tube of superglue and turned the whole thing into an artifact. The courier noticed within minutes, Kimberly said. "Sadie Cross. She's experienced." She felt the weight difference, checked the seal, and disappeared. Glue went dark within the hour. She paused. "Roland is furious. Roland Briggs just told me I destroyed 2 years of federal work in my kitchen on a Tuesday," I said. "Furious seems reasonable." "Nolan." She looked at me steadily. "I need you to know something. The reason I never told you, it wasn't only protocol. I was protecting you." "From what?" A pause. That same careful door closing behind her eyes that I'd seen once at the Federal Building, when I'd asked about glue. "That's classified," she said quietly. "2 times now. Two questions about the same shadow. Two identical doors closing just a fraction too smoothly. I was a history teacher, not an agent, but I had spent 12 years teaching people how to read what isn't said. And what wasn't being said was filling the room. Briggs came back in 20 minutes with analyst Priya Anand, a compact, precise woman in her early 30s, who gave the impression of someone who had read every file in the building and remembered all of them. She laid out the situation with the efficiency of a surgeon. The syndicate knew Kimberly's cover was compromised. They were watching her known associates. That meant me. Witness protection was on the table. Disappearing was on the table. Or, Briggs said, you help us rebuild. Help you how? You're uncatalogued. They don't have your face, your voice, your profile. You're the one clean asset we have left. He let that sit for a moment. A history teacher from Harwich, Tennessee, is the last person anyone would look at twice. That is genuinely the most backhanded compliment anyone has ever paid me. Briggs did not smile. I don't think Briggs had smiled since approximately 2009. It's not a compliment. It's a tactical assessment. I looked at Kimberly. She was looking at the table again. That habit she had when she was managing something she didn't want visible on her face. Kim. She looked up. Is this a good idea? A long pause, the longest since I'd walked in. And then, no, it's a terrible idea. Another pause. But I think you should do it. Which was, I reflected, the most honest thing she had said to me in 6 years. And somehow, coming from her, it was enough. I turned back to Briggs. Tell me what I need to do. I didn't know it yet, but somewhere across town, Priya Anand had already gone back to her desk and pulled up a secondary background thread on me. A routine procedure, she'd said. What she found on that thread was not routine. She hadn't told Briggs yet. She was still staring at her screen, going very still, deciding how to say it. They sent me to the Hollow 3 days later, a safe house in rural Arkansas that looked from the outside exactly like what it was supposed to look like. A forgettable farmhouse 40 minutes outside of nowhere with a gravel driveway and a porch light that flickered. Inside it was significantly less forgettable. Inside it was 3 weeks of crash course tradecraft, delivered by 2 instructors who communicated primarily through sighs and the occasional expression of barely contained professional disappointment. I learned how to surveil without being surveilled, how to make contact without leaving a trace, how to listen in a conversation for the thing beneath the thing being said, which, as it turned out, was not entirely unlike teaching teenagers who didn't want to be in class. You learn to read what the body was doing when the mouth was performing. Ralph Lewis texted me 3 times during those 3 weeks. The first said, "Told you." The second said, "Donna told me about the FBI guys. You okay?" The third said, "If you're in witness protection, you could have just said so, man." I did not respond to any of them. This was, professionally speaking, correct procedure. It was also the hardest thing I did in Arkansas. Kimberly and I spoke twice, short, monitored calls. She sounded like herself, careful and warm and funny in that devastating way. But there was something underneath it that was new. Or maybe it wasn't new. Maybe I was finally hearing something that had always been there, now that I knew what I was listening for. On the second call, right before she hung up, she said, "Nolan, when this is over, I'm going to tell you everything, every single thing, and then you can decide." Decide what? Whether any of it changes anything. I thought about that for a long time in the dark of the Arkansas farmhouse. About whether love can survive the discovery that the person you love has been a different person than you thought. About whether the map being wrong means the territory has changed. About whether 6 years of real mornings and real dinners and real laughter can be retroactively made false by the existence of a separate parallel truth. I didn't have an answer, but I was going to Memphis to find one. Aldermore Antiques sat on a quiet street in Memphis like a building that had decided, decades ago, to simply outlast everyone around it. 3 floors of curated European antiquities, brass door handles, the smell of old wood and older money. Karsten Mole had run it for 11 years. Legitimate on every surface, meticulous about the surfaces. The kind of man who understood that the best cover is one that doesn't feel like a cover at all, because it's mostly true. I walked in on a Thursday afternoon wearing a jacket I didn't own and a backstory I'd memorized the way I memorized lesson plans. Thoroughly, clinically, and with the specific fear of a person who knows that blanking in the middle will have consequences. Maul was behind the counter examining a small bronze figure with a loop. He was exactly as described. Mid-40s, well-dressed, the kind of handsome that comes with money and patience. He looked up when I came in with the polished ease of a man who had assessed and categorized me before I'd taken 2 steps through the door. "Looking for anything specific?" he asked. German South African accent, just a trace of it. Smooth. "A friend recommended you," I said. "Said you sometimes carry pre-war German cartography, maps, survey documents, that kind of thing." A pause so brief most people would have missed it. I didn't miss it. "We occasionally do," he said. "What period?" "Early 20th century. My area of interest is documentation of territorial changes post-1918. I held his gaze, the kind that got reclassified. Another pause. This one lasted exactly the right amount of time. "Come back Saturday," he said. "I may have something for you." I nodded, looked at the bronze figure, said something appreciative about its provenance, and left. Outside on the street, I walked 2 blocks, turned a corner, and stood against a brick wall for approximately 30 seconds, breathing like a man who had just diffused something. I had made contact. The chain was moving again, and somewhere above me in an FBI operations room in Nashville, Roland Briggs was watching a dot on a screen. And for the first time in 3 weeks, something in his chest had loosened slightly. What nobody in that operations room knew, what Priya Anand had been trying to find the right moment to say for 2 weeks, was what she had found in that secondary background thread. She told Briggs the night I came back from Memphis. I was debriefed, released to the safe house, and was eating a sandwich when my handler knocked on the door and told me Briggs needed me back at the Nashville field office. Now, Priya Anand was waiting in the briefing room. She looked like someone who had been carrying a piece of information that was too heavy to hold alone, and had finally decided she couldn't hold it anymore. "Mr. McCain," she said, "I need to ask you about your father." "My father died in a car accident," I said, "when I was 12. "Yes," she said carefully. "That's what the record says." The room got very quiet. "Before you became a teacher," she continued, setting a file on the table between us, "you worked as a government archivist, fresh out of college, for 14 months. "That's right. During those 14 months, you cataloged and handled a classified batch of defense documents. Documents that went missing approximately 6 weeks after your tenure ended." She paused. "The syndicate, Glue's network, has believed for 11 years that you either took those documents or that you know where they are. That belief is the reason this operation exists." Another pause. "Kimberly was originally assigned to get close to you and find out which." I sat with that for a moment. 6 years. She had been assigned to me. She had come to that conference, drunk that bad coffee, made that perfectly calibrated remark about the keynote speaker, and all of it had been, at the start, at the very beginning, a job. "She fell in love with you," Priya said quietly, as if she could read the calculation happening on my face. "She buried her original report. She never filed her findings. She's been protecting you from both sides, from us and from them, for 6 years. She met my eyes. That's why she wouldn't tell you who Glue was. She knew that if you knew who he was, it would break something she couldn't fix." "Who is he?" I asked. Priya opened the file and turned it toward me. I looked at the photograph for a long time. My father was 67 years old. He had more gray in his hair than I remembered, but I didn't remember much. I'd been 12, and he'd been, as far as I knew, dead for 26 years. He looked calm in the photo, unhurried. The kind of calm that doesn't come from peace. It comes from the absolute certainty that you are the most dangerous person in any room you enter. "Edgar Finch," Priya said, "known to his network as Glue." She paused. "Your father, Mr. McCain." I said nothing for a very long time. "The documents," I finally said. "Where are they?" "We believe he hid them in a storage unit registered under your childhood home address in Harwick. He planted them there before he disappeared. Insurance, against the government, against his own network, against anyone who might come for him." She closed the file. "He's been using your name as a shield for 26 years. The syndicate thinks you're complicit. The FBI has considered it. And the only person who has consistently, unconditionally, maintained that you knew nothing was your wife. I hadn't known. I genuinely hadn't known, and Kimberly had known that I hadn't known and had spent 6 years standing between me and everyone who wasn't sure. That was the weight she'd been carrying. That was what choosing me had cost her." "Okay," I said. Priya looked at me. "Okay. Tell me how we finish this." The final operation took 9 days to set up and 40 minutes to execute. Mole had moved up the chain exactly as planned, passing my name and profile to someone who passed it further, and that person to someone further still, until the request landed on the desk of a man who had not shown his face in years, and apparently decided after all this time that he wanted to see his son. Maybe that tells you something about Edgar Finch. Maybe it tells you everything. The riverside parking structure in Clarksville was cold and brutalist, and smelled like exhaust and rain. I stood on level 3 at 11:45 at night, with a wire under my jacket and 2 FBI teams in position on levels 2 and 4, and I waited. I had been told to expect one contact. I had not been told it would be him directly. That particular piece of information had been withheld from me, presumably because everyone involved had correctly assessed that I would have had significant feelings about it. He came alone, or appeared to. He was tall. I'd forgotten that, or maybe I'd never had the context to register it when I was 12. He walked with the unhurried ease of a man for whom threat assessment was as automatic as breathing. He stopped 6 feet away and looked at me with an expression that was almost paternal. "Nolan," he said, "you're supposed to be dead." I said, "I've been many things." He almost smiled. Dead was convenient for a while. 26 years of convenient. "You turned out well," he said, as if this were a normal observation between a father and son meeting for the first time in over 2 decades, in a parking garage, surrounded by federal agents. "History teacher. That's good. You always liked stories." "I teach history," I said. "Not stories. There's a difference." "Is there?" He tilted his head slightly. "I found they're largely the same thing. The version that wins is the one with the most convincing narrator." "The documents are in the storage unit on Kellner Road," I said. "The FBI already has them. It's done." Something shifted in his expression. Not panic. Not even surprise, really. More like a man who had been playing a very long game and had just watched the board tip. "She told you," he said quietly. "She protected me," I said. "For 6 years. From you, from your network, from the people who thought I was part of this. She stood between me and all of it, and she never told me because she knew it would." I stopped, steadied. "It doesn't matter. It's over." A long silence. Rain on the concrete outside. The distant sound of the river. "I wondered when you'd find your way here," he said finally. The line was delivered with the ease of a man who had been saving it. I recognized the instinct. It was mine. The perfectly timed remark. The calibrated exit line. I'd apparently inherited it. "I know," I said. "That's why I came." I stepped back. 2 FBI agents came out of the shadows on either side. Edgar Finch, glue, the man nothing had ever stuck to, put his hands up with the calm of someone who had always known this was the only ending available, and had simply been postponing it. From the shadows to my left, where she had absolutely not been authorized to be, Kimberly stepped out. She was in a jacket I recognized from our closet at 11 Briarwood Drive. She looked at the man in handcuffs for a long moment with an expression I had no name for. He looked back at her. "You broke protocol," he said. "Coming here." "I broke protocol the day I filed a false report to protect your son," she said. This seemed relatively minor by comparison. He almost laughed. Almost. Then Briggs was there, and the moment was over, and Edgar Finch was being walked toward a waiting vehicle with the careful, unhurried steps of a man going somewhere he was never going to leave. Kimberly stood next to me, and we watched until the vehicle was gone. "Sadie Cross," I said. She was his the whole time. From the beginning. She never actually disappeared. She walked straight back to him and told him the operation was compromised. He spent 2 weeks deciding whether to run or surface. A pause. "He surfaced because of you. He wanted to see me." Yes, I thought about that. About a man who had faked his own death and built a criminal empire and stayed invisible for 26 years, and then walked into a parking garage because he wanted to look at his son. About whether it said anything at all. History, I had told my students 1,000 times, is not a collection of facts. It's a collection of choices. And every choice, no matter how buried, leaves a mark on everything that comes after it. I was going to have to figure out what to do with that. Edgar "Glue" Finch was arrested, processed, and charged with 11 federal counts, including espionage, racketeering, and conspiracy. Nothing stuck to him for 26 years. Everything stuck to him now. The defense documents were recovered from the storage unit on Kellner Road, exactly where Priya Anand had said they'd be. Nolan McCain, me, was formally cleared of all suspicion, and issued what amounted to a federal apology, delivered in the tone of someone who was very sorry, but also fairly busy. Kimberly resigned from the FBI 2 weeks after the arrest. She didn't make a big thing of it. She came home to 11 Briarwood Drive on a Wednesday evening, put her bag on the kitchen counter, and made tea. We sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Two people who had been lying to each other for entirely different, entirely devastating reasons. Two people who had chosen each other, repeatedly and at considerable cost, even when they couldn't say so out loud. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Okay." The conference, where we met, the bad coffee, the remark about the keynote speaker. I looked at her. Was any of that at the start? Was any of that the assignment? She was quiet for a moment. "The conference was the assignment," she said. "Everything after the first 30 seconds was not." "What happened after 30 seconds? "You laughed," she said, too loud, completely unguarded, like nobody was watching. "And I thought—" She stopped, a small, complicated smile. "I thought, that man has no idea how to be anyone other than exactly who he is. And I hadn't been around someone like that in so long I didn't know what to do with it." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, Harwick went about its evening. On the counter, next to the bag, there was a bottle. A small, matte black bottle with minimalist font. I didn't know how it had gotten there, and I didn't ask. Maybe Kimberly had put it there deliberately. Maybe it was a reminder. Maybe it was her particular devastating sense of humor finally surfacing after 6 years of careful management. Neither of us moved it. Neither of us laughed. But almost, we did. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.